The alien arena was shaped like a giant bowl of metal and stone. Thousands of voices filled the air, shouting and stamping their feet. The crowd had come for one reason: to watch blood spill. Bright lights burned down on the center, where a single figure stood. A human. His clothes were dusty. His boots were scuffed. Yet he stood calm, hands loose at his sides, eyes scanning the stands. He had fought before maybe too many times, but this time was different. Across from him, standing at the high edge of the arena, was the alien mistress. Her skin shimmered in deep shades of violet, her tall frame draped in black and gold robes. That marked her as someone important, someone powerful. Her eyes were narrow, sharp like the tip of a blade. And chained beside her was the nightmare of the galaxy. The predator. It was massive. Its head reached the chest of a grown man, even when crouching. Its body was covered in dark, jagged fur, muscles twitching under the skin. 4 glowing eyes stared down at the human, and a long whip-like tail swished slowly from side to side. Its teeth, long and hooked, gleamed under the lights. The creature had killed hundreds in this arena. No one had ever survived in order to attack. The mistress raised her hand. The crowd grew silent. Her voice rang out in her native tongue, cold and commanding, "End him." The chain rattled as the predator stepped forward. Its claws scraped against the floor, leaving deep lines in the stone. Every step echoed in the air, and the human could feel the vibration through his boots. Still, he didn't move. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed cruelly. Most believed the human wouldn't last 10 seconds. The predator's eyes locked on him. It stopped just a few feet away. The human could hear its breathing, slow, heavy, almost like the growl of a machine. The smell of blood and fur filled the air. Then the creature crouched low, ready to leap. The human braced himself, but instead of attacking, the predator froze. Its nostrils flared. Its head tilted slightly to one side, sniffed the air again. And then, to everyone's shock, it took another step forward, not with rage, but with hesitation. The mistress frowned from above. She barked another order. The predator ignored her. It leaned closer, its nose almost touching the human's boot. Then, in front of thousands of stunned eyes, the beast opened its mouth not to bite, but to gently lick the dust from the leather. Gasps filled the arena. Someone shouted in confusion. Others laughed nervously. But the human just stared down at the creature, his heart pounding. He didn't understand it, not yet. The mistress's face tightened in anger. This was not how the show was supposed to go. Her weapon, her pride, her undefeated champion, was showing submission to a human. The predator stayed low, its tail curling slowly on the ground. It let out a deep, strange sound, not a growl, but something almost like a purr. The human bent down slightly, his eyes narrowing as if searching for an answer in the creature's strange, glowing gaze. Somewhere deep inside his memory, something stirred. But before he could think about it, the mistress slammed her hand against the railing above. "Guards," she shouted. 2 armored alien guards stepped forward, weapons ready. The human straightened, his muscles tensing. Predator's eyes flashed red for a moment, and it swung its head toward the guards, lips pulling back to reveal its teeth. The crowd went wild now, with excitement for a kill. But because they could sense something dangerous was happening, something no one expected, the human took a slow step back. The predator followed him, not in attack, but in a way that almost looked protective. The chain still hung from its collar, but it was no longer connected to the wall above. "Restrain it," the mistress ordered, her voice cracked with fury. 1 guard moved forward, raising an electric spear. The predator's tail lashed. In a blur, it lunged not at the human, but at the guard. The impact knocked the alien to the ground, the spear clattering away. The other guard hesitated, unsure if he was facing the predator, or the human it now seemed to defend. The human's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. The predator's reaction meant something from the past. He didn't know why, but he felt certain. This beast knew him. The mistress's eyes narrowed even further, cold calculation replacing her shock. "So, that's how it is," she murmured. From the stands, a low chant began to rise. First a few voices, then hundreds. It wasn't the mistress's name they were chanting. It was the humans. The sound rolled across the arena like thunder. The mistress clenched her fists. She would not be humiliated in her own domain. She would take back her control, no matter the cost. The human glanced at the predator beside him. For just a second, their eyes met. The bond between them wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain: they were now on the same side. And everyone in the arena, friend or enemy, could feel that this was only the beginning. Rain fell like thin knives on the jungle moon. It was years before the arena, before the crowd, before the mistress's cold voice. Back then, the creature was only a small, shaking cub mud on its fur, blood on its paws, metal wire cutting into its leg. It hid under twisted roots, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Every sound in the jungle meant danger. Every flash of lightning meant it could be seen. The cub tried to pull its leg free again. The wire bit deeper. It whimpered softly, then stopped. Itself terrified another predator would hear. The jungle did not forgive weakness, swallowed the weak, and forgot their names. A light flickered through the trees, slow, careful, not like a hunter's torch. The cub tensed. The light drew closer. And with it came a shape tall, two-legged, wearing a dark rain cloak. The figure stepped into the hollow where the roots made a small shelter. The cub bared its tiny teeth and growled. It had to look strong. It tried to look dangerous. But the figure did not raise a weapon. Easy, said a calm voice, soft and steady, rolling like warm air. The language meant nothing to the cub, but the tone did. It was not the voice of a hunter who wanted a trophy. It was not the voice of a master who wanted a slave. It was something else. It was a threat across a storm. The human kneeled in the mud. He placed his light on the ground and turned it away so it would not shine in the cub's eyes. He pulled off a glove and held out his bare hand, palm open, fingers still. The jungle rain filled the silence. The cub smelled salt, wet leather, metal, and something mild and strange sweet like the fruit that grew high on the ridge after the first rains. The cub's nose twitched. That growl faded. "Let me see," the human whispered. The cub hesitated, then lifted its hurt leg just a little. The wire was wrapped around bone and fur-barbed. Ugly, pulled tight by a trap hidden in the mud. The human saw the sharp points and breathed out slowly. His eyes were kind, but careful. He did not rush, studied the trap and studied the cub. As if both were complicated and both deserved respect, he pulled a small tool from his pack. The metal looked thin, but it was strong. He slid it slowly under the wire. The cub flinched. The human paused and let the cub sniff his wrist. The cub pressed its nose against his skin. "No fear, no lie, only rain." "Okay," the human said. And he began to work. He cut the first loop, then the second. Every cut hurt. Every cut also brought relief. When the last barb snapped, the wire fell away. Blood ran down the cub's leg and mixed with the mud.
Ow.
The cub's chest rose and fell, fast. It stared at the human, eyes wide with shock and something new. Not submission, not debt. A memory that would not let go. The human cleaned the wound with water from a small bottle. He wrapped the leg in soft fabric. He did all this slowly. So, the cub would not panic. When he finished, he sat back in the mud, tired but calm, and reached into his pack again. He took out a small ration bar, broke off a piece, and placed it on the ground between them. The cub sniffed it. The smell made its head swim. It was food like nothing in the jungle, dense, warm, rich. It took the piece and ate fast, then stopped, embarrassed, and lowered its head. The human smiled, placed another piece on the ground. The cub ate slower this time. The human did not reach to touch it. It watched the trees and listened to the rain, as if he was just keeping guard for a friend. When the bar was gone, the cub lifted its head and made a soft sound. The human stood. He looked toward the hills where night hunters soon would wake. He looked back at the cub, then at the path. He pointed to the roots. "Stay," he said, and his hand made a gentle pushing motion, as if telling the rain itself to be patient. He stepped into the jungle and vanished. The cub waited, shivering, fear scratching at its ribs. 10 breaths, 20, 30, lightning again, a roar in the distance. The cub wanted to run, but it could not run far. Its leg pulsed with pain. The human returned with long leaves, dry bark, and a burning stick. He built a small, careful fire. Under the roots where the smoke would slip away, instead of rising and calling other beasts, he warmed stones and placed them near the cub's leg, not touching, just close enough to send comfort through the bandage. The cub relaxed, without meaning to. Its eyes grew heavy. It lay its head on the mud and slept. When it woke, the fire was ash. The rain had stopped. Dawn was gray and thin. The human sat with his back to the roots, watching the open path. A tool. Resting across his knees, he looked like he had not slept, but his eyes were still clear. The cub shifted and tested its leg. It hurt less. The human turned his head slowly and met the cub's eyes. "You'll make it," he said. His voice held a smile. He reached for his pack and pulled out a small metal tag with a soft strap. He studied it, then put it away again. He did not mark the cub. He did not own it. He only helped. He stood, packed his things, and pointed toward the thick ferns where the cub's den might be. Then he took a step back from the roots, then another. The cub pushed itself up, testing the bandage. It limped forward a little and stopped, confused by a feeling it could not name. The human raised his open hand in farewell. He turned and walked down the path between the trees, alone. The cub watched until the rain-heavy leaves hid him. It moved, slowly following his scent for a short time, then turned toward safety. Behind it, the jungle swallowed the footprints. Days passed. The wound healed. The cub learned to hunt again. Small things first, then bigger. It learned to hide better. It learned the wind and the patterns of the birds. It grew fast. In the dark, hours before dawn, it would sometimes wake and remember warm stones and a soft voice. And it would not feel afraid. But the jungle's kindness was not permanent. Trappers came, not alone, but in groups. They moved without smell, covered in a bitter oil that confused the nose. They used nets that fell from the trees with a hiss like a snake. The creature fought, but the nets were heavy in their needles. Burned. They put a collar on its neck and a muzzle on its mouth. They dragged it to a ship with metal floors and bright white lights that did not blink like stars. It saw other beasts in cages. It saw people in chains. It saw the trappers smile with dead eyes as they counted money and argued about owners and markets. Beyond the hole, the jungle moon became a small green coin and then nothing. Training began on a war world. If it obeyed, it ate. If it disobeyed, it bled. They shouted commands in a harsh language and shocked its muscles when it hesitated. They turned fear into a circle with no doors. The creature grew larger and stronger, but its heart learned silence the way a cave learns darkness. Only one memory survived the drills and the pain. A hand in the rain. A voice that did not demand. Stones giving warmth instead of fire. The scent of leather and metal and something mild and sweet. Years later, the arena crowd screamed. The collar was heavier now, carved with the mistress's crest. The chain rattled. The sand smelled of old blood. Opponents entered, proud and loud, and the creature ended them. It became a legend with 4 eyes and a black tail like a whip. The mistress watched from above, her rings catching light, her smile thin and sharp. Then the human walked onto the sand. The creature felt it first through the air. Like a note it once heard long ago, it turned its head. The scent cut through. Noise and lights and old pain, as if the jungle rain had returned. Leather, metal, that mild sweetness. The human's boots pressed into the sand. He looked calm, but his heart beat quick and strong. The mistress raised her hand. The chain loosened. "End him," she ordered. The creature stepped forward, muscles coiled, training roaring in its bones. Kill on command, kill to eat, kill to stop the pain. It moved closer. The human did not run. He did not beg. The scent reached. Full memory, The creature stopped. The arena vanished. The jungle roots returned. The warm stones returned. The soft voice returned. Not a master, not a hunter. A friend in the storm? It lowered its head and licked the dust from the human's boot in the stands. The chant wavered into stunned silence. The mistress's face froze. Guards moved. Weapons sparked. But the creature was no longer a machine of orders. The old memory had woken like a sun behind a black cloud. It turned and stood between the human and the spears. In that moment, the past was not a story. It was a bond. It was a promise. And it was stronger than the mistress's chain. The alien mistress stood like a statue at the edge of the arena, but inside, her blood burned. Her own champion, her perfect predator, was bowing its head to a human. The humiliation was sharp, like a blade against her pride. In her culture, to lose control of one's bonded beast was the greatest shame. And the crowd had seen everything. At first there was silence, a deep, breathless silence that carried across the whole arena. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves. The words traveled from seat to seat, lips to ears, growing louder, sharper. They weren't whispering about her victory anymore. They were whispering about him, the human. The mistress's four-fingered hands gripped the stone railing until her knuckles turned pale. This was not the show she had promised the spectators. The event had been announced for weeks, the execution of a rare off-world human, torn apart by her most famous weapon. She had seen the betting boards. The odds were completely one-sided. Every gambler in the crowd was holding their breath. Sensing that the entire fight had changed, the mistress barked a sharp order in her native tongue, her voice like broken glass. The predator didn't even glance at her. It stayed near the human, tail coiling like a living whip, eyes fixed on her guards, instead. That defiance, it was worse than an open insult. "Seize him," she shouted. Her voice echoed off the arena walls. Two guards moved quickly, their armor glinting under the bright lights. They carried long electro spears designed to pierce both man and beast. The crowd roared, half in excitement, half in confusion. The human shifted his stance, hands still free but muscles ready. His eyes flicked between the guards and the predator, reading every movement. The predator lowered its head, the deep growl in its throat vibrating against the floor. The first guard lunged at the human. The predator moved faster than a blink. Its massive paw struck the guard's chest, sending him flying into the sand. The second guard hesitated too long. The predator bared its teeth, and the sight alone was enough to make him step back. The human didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood there, letting the creature choose its side. The crowd had gone mad now, shouting in a dozen different languages. Some cried for the mistress to kill them both. Others began to cheer for the human, chanting his name, though they did not know it. The noise was thunder, rising higher with each heartbeat. The mistress could feel her control slipping. If she allowed this moment to grow, she would lose not only the fight, but the respect and fear of everyone watching. On her world, a leader who lost control was a leader soon replaced. Her mind raced. She couldn't simply have the predator killed. It was worth more than the gold in her private vault. It had taken years to train, to break, to mold into a weapon that obeyed without question. But now, it remembered something strong enough to defy her. She studied the human closely from above. He wasn't afraid. That in itself was dangerous. But what worried her most was the way the predator stayed near him, almost touching his leg, like a guardian. This wasn't a momentary distraction. This was a bond. Her lips curled into a smile, though it was cold and without joy. "So," she murmured, "you know each other." The crowd noise dipped for a moment as she raised her hand again. This time her voice was sweet, almost calm. "Bring them to me," she ordered. The guards obeyed, but carefully. They knew now that approaching the human meant facing the predator's fury. They formed a half circle, weapons raised but not yet striking. The human stepped back slowly, keeping himself between the predator and the guards. The mistress descended from her platform, each step slow and deliberate. Her long robes dragged through the sand, leaving dark streaks. She wanted the crowd to see her calm, her control returning. But inside, her thoughts were sharp. She stopped a few meters away from the human. Her eyes flicked to the predator. "I own you," she said to it, her voice low but edged with steel. "I raised you from nothing. I fed you, trained you. Without me, you would have died in the mud." The predator did not blink. Its lips curled, just slightly revealing the points of its teeth. "And yet," the mistress continued, turning her gaze to the human, "you choose him. A stranger, a prisoner. Do you think he can protect you from me?" The human didn't answer. He didn't need to. The predator stepped forward, placing itself fully between them, tail brushing against his leg. The crowd erupted again, sensing the insult. The mistress's authority had been openly challenged in front of thousands. Worse, she could not end it without losing the beast. Her smile vanished. She took a single step closer. "You," she said to the human, her tone like a knife point, "have taken something of mine that will not stand." The human tilted his head slightly. "Maybe it was never yours," he said quietly. The predator's growl deepened, vibrating. Through the ground, the mistress's jaw tightened. She turned abruptly and walked back toward her platform, her robes whipping in the air. "Lock down the arena," she ordered without looking back. "No one leaves until I decide what to do." Gates slammed shut around them. The sound was final, like the lid of a coffin. The crowd's roar shifted into an uneasy murmur. The human knew what this meant. He was trapped. And the predator was trapped too, but the mistress wasn't finished. She had a plan forming. And it was cruel. She couldn't break the beast's loyalty through fear or pain. She would destroy the human instead. Not in the open arena, where the crowd might turn against her, but in the shadows where no one could see. She climbed back to her throne-like seat, her gaze never leaving them. "Enjoy your moment," she called down. "It will be your last." The human and the predator stood in the center of the arena. The sand beneath their boots and claws still marked by the fight that hadn't happened. The crowd shifted restlessly, sensing that something far bigger than a simple execution was about to unfold. For the first time since stepping into the arena, the human looked down at the predator with something like understanding. Whatever had brought them together in the past, it had just made them enemies of the most dangerous woman on the planet. And in that moment, they both knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. The arena emptied slowly that night, but not because the crowd was bored. No, every spectator left with the same feeling crawling under their skin. They had just seen something forbidden, something that should not have been possible. Whispers trailed down the long metal corridors and into the neon-lit streets about the human who had stood unafraid, and the predator who had licked his boot instead of tearing him apart. High above, in a private observation deck, the mistress sat in silence. Her golden chalice of spiced wine was untouched. She stared down at the empty arena floor as if she could still see them, man and beast, standing together in defiance. She wasn't just humiliated, she was curious. How could a wild-born predator, broken and reshaped by years of training, still remember a human? She would find the answer. And when she did, she would use it to destroy them both. Below the arena, far from the noisy streets, the human sat in a cell. It was no ordinary prison. The walls were smooth black stone, reinforced with metal veins, designed to keep creatures far stronger than him from escaping. In the opposite corner, behind a second gate of humming energy bars, lay the predator. The creature's glowing eyes followed him in the dim light. It did not pace like a trapped animal. Dead, it rested with its head on its paws, tail curled loosely around its body. To any guard passing by, it might look calm, but the human could feel its attention sharp, steady, like a bowstring pulled tight. "Do you remember me?" he asked quietly, though he wasn't sure why he spoke aloud. His voice didn't echo here. The walls swallowed sound. The predator lifted its head. It blinked once, slowly. Then, with surprising gentleness, it pressed its nose against the energy bars. The faint crackle of electricity bit into its fur, but it didn't flinch. The human took a step closer until he could feel the faint warmth of its breath. A memory tugged at him: mud, rain, and a pair of frightened, glowing eyes under a tangle of roots. Back then, he had been younger, thinner, and more desperate himself. Had stumbled across a trapped cub, bleeding from a cruel snare. He had freed it without thinking of the risk, shared his last ration, and left without expecting anything. In return, he had almost forgotten. Almost. But the predator hadn't. From the shadows of the corridor, a voice spoke in the alien tongue. A guard approached, broad-shouldered, armored, and carrying a tray of food. He slid it through the narrow slot in the human's cell, the movement sharp and unfriendly. For the predator, he tossed a chunk of raw meat onto the floor behind the energy bars. The predator ignored it. Its eyes stayed on the human. The guard laughed under his breath. Strange thing, he muttered in broken trade language. What? Rather starve than eat without you. The human's brow furrowed. That wasn't normal animal behavior. This wasn't just loyalty. It was something deeper. The guard moved on, boots echoing against the stone floor. When his steps faded, the human crouched near the energy barrier again. The predator shifted closer until their faces were almost level. Its breathing slowed. The tension in its body eased. For a strange, still moment, the cell felt less like a prison and more like a shelter. Hours passed. The mistress did not send for them. She was patient, but patience from someone like her was dangerous. It meant planning. The human tried to rest, leaning back against the wall. But every time his eyes closed, the predator's low rumble would roll across the cell. Not a warning, not a growl, something else. Almost like it was keeping him anchored, making sure he didn't slip too far into sleep where danger could reach him first. When the overhead lights dimmed, marking the deep hours of the night, a faint mechanical hum stirred the air. The human's eyes snapped open. The predator's ears twitched. Somewhere far above, gears turned. A hidden door slid open in the predator's cell. Ash! Two handlers stepped through, each with a shock spear in hand. They spoke softly to each other, ignoring the human entirely. Their plan was clear. They were here to take the predator. The predator rose slowly, its muscles flowing under thick fur. Its eyes flicked toward the human, then back to the handlers. The human felt his stomach tighten. He knew the mistress wouldn't simply remove the creature for harmless reasons. One handler pressed a control on his wristband. The predator's collar lit with a sharp electric pulse. The creature stiffened but didn't fall. The handlers stepped forward, their spears raised, ready to force it through the door. Wait, the human said sharply. The handlers didn't understand or didn't care. The predator's claws scraped the floor as the collar burned its skin again. Something inside the human snapped. Stop it, he shouted, stepping up to the energy bars of his own cell. His voice carried with a force he hadn't used in years. The predator's eyes shot to him instantly. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't words, but it was clear. Don't fight for meal, fight for you. The predator moved suddenly, but not toward the handlers. It lunged toward the human's cell, pressing its whole weight against the energy barrier. Sparks burst. The handlers cursed and jabbed their spears, but the creature ignored them, focused entirely on staying as close to the human as possible. Then the power flickered. The arena's lower levels weren't built for long outages. And the hum of the energy barrier died for half a second, just enough for the predator to force its head through and snap the control baton from a handler's hand. The corridor filled with chaos. Alarms blared. The predator didn't kill the handlers. It only drove them back, staying beside the human's cell. It growled low, the sound like a promise to anyone who dared step closer. The human pressed his hand through the bars, resting it lightly on the predator's jaw. The creature closed its eyes for a heartbeat, leaning into the touch. By the time the alarms died, more guards had arrived. They forced the predator back with nets and spears, but they couldn't hide the truth from themselves. This was no longer the mistress's weapon. This was a bond, something she could not order or break by force. From the observation screens, the mistress watched the entire thing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She finally understood. This wasn't about obedience anymore. This was about memory. And memory was harder to kill than any man. As the predator was dragged back into its cell and the energy barriers flared to life again, Human sat down slowly, his mind racing. Whatever connection they shared, it had survived years, pain, and control. But he also knew something else. If the mistress understood its strength, she would use it against them both. And when she moved, she would not give them a second chance. The alien city slept under a red sky, its towers like jagged teeth against the light of the moons. Most people believed the arena's fighters were locked deep below ground, caged like beasts, until the next spectacle. That night, however, a shadow moved where no shadow should have been. It was the human. The escape hadn't been planned, at least, not by him. One moment, he was in his cell. The next, the power flickered again, alarms wailed, and his door slid open without explanation. The predator's cell had stayed sealed, which made no sense. Someone wanted him free, but not the beast. He didn't waste the opportunity. The corridors twisted like a maze, every turn marked with alien glyphs he couldn't read. His boots made no sound on the padded floor, but in this silence, even a breath felt loud. Somewhere above, heavy gears turned. Patrol drones floated past the high windows, their lights sweeping over empty plazas. The human had no illusions. Mistress had let him go. This wasn't mercy, it was bait. Far away in her private chamber, the mistress watched a three-dimensional projection of the city. A red dot marked his location, moving steadily through the lower districts. Around him, a wide ring of smaller dots began to close in. She sipped her spiced wine. "Let the hunt begin," she said softly. Elite trackers were already on the streets, mercenaries from the cold moons, silent killers from the shadow colonies, and her own personal hunters armed with shock spears and net launchers. They moved like wolves, circling their prey without ever revealing themselves. But they weren't hunting to kill. Not yet. They were herding him toward the old quarter, toward the pens where the predator had once been kept before it was trained. She wanted to see what the beast would do when the human was brought back, not as a fighter, but as prey. The human knew he was being followed long before he saw anyone. It was the small things, the sudden absence of street noise, the glint of a scope on a rooftop, the faint vibration in the metal walkway as someone stepped onto it behind him. He didn't run. Running would draw the pack in faster. Instead, he ducked into narrow alleys, slipping between broken market stalls and shuttered shops. The air smelled of oil and alien spice, heavy enough to mask his scent, least for a while. A sharp hiss echoed from ahead. He stopped. From the shadows, a net launcher fired. He twisted sideways, the edge of the net scraping his shoulder before hitting the wall behind him. It sizzled with tiny arcs of electricity, enough to knock him cold if it had caught him fully. "Close," a voice muttered in the alien tongue. The human grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and hurled it into the darkness. It clanged loudly, bouncing down a side street. The hunter chased the noise, giving the human a few more seconds to move. Meanwhile, far below the city, the predator paced in its cell. Something was wrong. It didn't understand the alarms or the guards' hurried movements, but it felt an absence and emptiness where the human's presence had been. It pressed its head against the energy bars. Sparks bit into its skin, but it stayed there, listening. Somewhere in the distance, faint and muffled, it caught a familiar rhythm, the sound of boots on metal, moving fast. The beast's muscles tensed. Its claws clicked against the floor. Back, on the streets, the human reached the edge of the old quarter. The buildings here leaned over the streets like they were eavesdropping. Most were abandoned, their windows covered in rusted shutters. The air was cooler, and the only light came from the moons above. The first hunter revealed himself, a tall figure in bone armor, a shock spear in one hand. He didn't rush, just stepped into the human's path, blocking the narrow street. The human stopped. He could hear more footsteps behind him now. Another hunter, then another, closing in. He took a slow breath. He couldn't fight them all. From the rooftops, something moved, to shadow leaping from one building to the next. The hunters didn't notice. The human did. The shadow landed between him and the bone-armored figure. A low growl filled the street, vibrating in the walls. For glowing eyes burned in the dark. The predator, for a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one of the hunters cursed. "Control it," he shouted. Two tried. Shock spears flashed with arcs of blue light. The predator dodged the first strike and caught the second in its jaws, snapping the shaft like dry wood. The bone-armored hunter lunged at the human, but the predator slammed into him, sending him sprawling into the dust. The human didn't waste the opening. He grabbed the fallen hunter's spear and spun it in his hands. The weapon was heavier than it looked, but it hummed with lethal power. The street became chaos hunters shouting. The predator tearing through nets and dodging stun blasts. The human striking with the spear to keep attackers at bay. But the mistresses? Hunters were skilled, and they knew how to fight the beast. Net after net was fired, forcing the predator back. One hunter managed to slip a shock collar over its neck, and with a flick of a switch, the predator roared in pain. Lapsing for a moment, the human moved without thinking. He swung the spear at the hunter, holding the control device, knocking it from his hand. The predator ripped it apart with its teeth, the sparks scattering into the night. Somewhere high above, the mistress's voice came through a hidden cum in the hunters' helmets. "Enough," she said. "Fall back." The hunters obeyed instantly, melting into the shadows as quickly as they'd appeared. The human and the predator were left alone in the empty street. Breathing hard, the predator padded closer, lowering its head until its muzzle brushed against his side. It was more than a greeting, it was a claim. The human rested a hand on its thick fur. "Looks like they wanted to push us here," he said quietly. The predator's ears twitched. Didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. Somewhere out there, the mistress had seen everything. She had wanted to test their bond, and they had passed. It only meant one thing: her next move would be far more dangerous, and the hunt wasn't over. The alien arena was silent. Not empty silent. Tens of thousands of beings from across the system had gathered in the stands, but their voices were muted, as if they could feel something different in the air. The mistress had promised a spectacle, unlike anything before, and the mistress always delivered, even if her version of delivered meant blood. In the center, the sand had been replaced with black volcanic glass. The surface reflected the arena lights like dark water, amplifying the sense that this was not the same place the human had first stood. Above, banners, in the mistress's gold and black colors, hung from towering pillars, each one bearing the crest of her house, a predator's jaw, open and ready to strike. But tonight, the predator itself was no longer her weapon. That truth was the dagger buried deep in her pride, and she intended to pull it out with a public display that would humiliate the human and reclaim her control. Back in the holding chambers beneath the arena, the human stood with his back against the wall, listening to the distant rumble of the crowd. The predator paced inside its reinforced pen a few meters away, muscles tight, tail lashing. It could sense the tension in him just as he could sense the restrained fury in it. "They want us in there together," the human said quietly. "Not as allies." The predator's eyes narrowed. The heavy doors hissed open. 4 guards entered, their armor polished, their movements sharp. "Time," one of them said in the trade tongue. The human gave a small nod and stepped forward. But before the guards could open the predator's gate, the mistress herself appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 silent bodyguards. Her golden robes shimmered under the cold light. She studied them both with a slow, calculating smile. "You've given me trouble," she said to the human, her voice smooth and deadly. "Trouble is expensive." He said nothing. She walked to the predator's gate, close enough for the creature to smell her scent spice, silk, and faint iron. "And you," she said softly, "you forgot who you belong to." The predator growled, the sound deep enough to rattle the wall. The mistress straightened. "Out," she ordered. The gate slid open with a hiss. The predator didn't move until the human stepped forward. and only then did it follow. When they emerged into the arena, the noise exploded. Tens of thousands of voices screamed, cheered, and jeered. The mistress raised her hands for silence, and the sound faded instantly. "Today," she called, her voice echoing, "we witness the end of this farce. My champion will return to me, and the off-world trespasser will learn his place." From the far side of the arena, massive gates opened. Out stepped 5 other predators similar in size to the human's ally, but leaner, hungrier, and utterly loyal to her. They spread out across the black glass floor, their glowing eyes fixed on the human and the lone predator beside him. The crowd roared. The human's jaw tightened. "So this is it," he murmured. The predator's claws clicked against the glass. As it stepped closer to him, shoulder brushing his leg, its gaze swept the others, measuring the danger. The mistress lowered her hand. The signal was given. The first 2 predators charged together, their paws thundering against the floor. The human spun aside, narrowly avoiding the snap of massive jaws. His predator slammed into one attacker, the impact sending both skidding. Across the glass, the human had no weapon, only his speed and the instincts that had kept him alive this long. He ducked under a lunging strike, grabbed a loose chain from the floor, and looped it around a charging predator's neck. Using the creature's own momentum, he yanked it sideways into another attacker, sending both sprawling. But there were too many. Mistress had chosen them. Well, each trained to fight as a pack, to separate prey from protection. 2 of them, focused entirely on the human, driving him backward. While the others tried to isolate his ally, the crowd's shouts merged into a single pulsing roar. High above, the mistress watched with narrowed eyes. She could see if the human and the predator were not just fighting side by side. They were fighting together. Every movement was coordinated, as if they had trained for years. The human would draw an enemy close, giving the predator an opening to strike. The predator would force another into the human's reach, allowing him to use its weight against it. This wasn't luck. This was trust. And the crowd was starting to see it too. The cheers that had once been for blood were now mixed. With cries for the human's survival, that shift made the mistress's fingers tighten on the armrest of her throne. One of the predators managed to clamp its jaws on the human's arm. Pain flared white-hot, but before it could crush bone, his ally was there, biting down on its shoulder and ripping it away from him. Blood splattered across the glass. The human stumbled, clutching his arm, but stayed upright. The mistress rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the noise. "Obey me," she shouted at the predator. "Finish him." For a heartbeat, the arena froze. All 6 predators turned their heads toward her voice. Her command was meant for his predator, the one that had betrayed her. But it didn't move toward the human. Instead, it lowered its head, growled low, and turned its eyes directly on her. The crowd erupted, sensing the rebellion. The mistress's face twisted in fury. The fight exploded again, fiercer than before. The human and his predator fought like one creature, driving the others back step by step. When the last of the mistress's beasts collapsed onto the glass floor, too wounded to rise, a strange silence filled the air. The human stood with his chest heaving, his arm bleeding, and the predator beside him, taller, stronger eyes blazing. With victory, the mistress's gaze swept over them, cold and sharp. "You've made your choice," she said. She turned and walked away, her robes whispering over the floor. But the human knew this wasn't over. This wasn't defeat for her, it was a promise of something worse to come. As the gates opened for them to leave, the crowd surged into chants, some calling the human's name, others simply roaring in wild approval. The predator brushed its muzzle against his hand, a silent confirmation of the bond they had just proven in front of an entire world. But above them, in the shadows of the mistress's departing figure, plans were already being made. The final act had not yet been written. The arena had returned, and so had the war between them. The morning after the arena fight, the city was unsettled. Markets still opened, skycraft still glided between the towers, merchants still shouted in the streets, but an undercurrent rippled through it all. People whispered about the human, and the predator who had defied the mistress in front of thousands. Some called it bravery. Others called it madness. A few swore it was the beginning of the end for her rule in the high spire of her palace. The mistress sat in her private war room. Hollow screens floated in the air, each showing a different view of the city. She had not slept. She didn't need. Tuingar kept her sharp. Her advisors stood around the table, shifting uneasily. They had seen the crowd's reaction yesterday. They knew the human and his beast had captured something dangerous. Loyalty. This cannot continue. At, one of them said carefully. It won't. At, the mistress replied. She turned to the central hala and tapped the control panel. A still image of the human and the predator appeared the moment after their victory in the arena. Her gaze lingered on it before she spoke. Prepare the execution ground, she ordered. Public, no cage, no mercy. The advisors hesitated. And the beast? She smiled coldly. The beast will deliver the killing blow. Below the palace in the fortified holding cells, the human sat cross-legged on the floor. The predator lay close by, its head resting against the bars that separated them. They didn't need words to know something was coming. The guards were different today, more of them. Wearing heavier armor, carrying weapons meant for war, not for prisoner duty. The human had seen enough battlefields to recognize the signs. This wasn't another arena show. This was the end game. When the mistress arrived, she didn't hide her satisfaction. You've embarrassed me, she said, her voice smooth but edged with steel. Twice. That is 2 times more than anyone in this city has survived. The human stood, meeting her gaze. I'm still breathing, not for long. She stepped closer to the predator's cell. Your friend here will see to that. The predator's ears flattened, a low rumble building in its throat. The mistress pressed a small device into her palm. This collar was made for one purpose: absolute obedience. Even loyalty can be burned out if you turn up the heat enough. She turned her gaze to the predator. When the crowd gathers, you will kill him. You won't have a choice. They were brought to the execution grounds in the heart of the city. It wasn't like the arena. There were no walls, no gates, just an open plaza with high platforms surrounding it. Tens of thousands filled every level, their voices a low, hungry hum. The human was shoved into the center, his hands free but surrounded on all sides by armed guards. The predator was led in from the opposite side, the new collar around its neck glowing faintly with crimson light. From her balcony above, the mistress raised her hand. Citizens, she called, you will see justice today. The off-worlder who defied our laws will fall. By the jaws of the beast he thought was his friend. The crowd roared. The human's eyes locked on the predator's. It took one step forward, its claws scratching against the stone. The collar's glow brightened. At first, nothing happened. The predator simply stood there, muscles tight, head low. But then its body shuddered, and its eyes flickered between gold and red. The collar's control signal pulsed through its nerves, twisting instinct into command. The human knew what was happening. He'd seen it in other creatures when control devices overloaded natural thought, forcing an animal to act against itself. The predator snarled, lips pulling back from its teeth, began to stalk toward him. The crowd leaned forward. The mistress watched with a satisfied smile. The human didn't move. You know me, he said quietly. You remember? The predator's steps faltered, but the collar flared brighter, forcing it forward. Its breath came in short, ragged bursts. You were in the mud, the human said, his voice carrying, just enough for the predator to hear over the crowd. The rain, the fire under the roots. The predator stopped just 2 paces away. Its teeth were bared, saliva dripping onto the stone. The crowd began to chant for blood. The collar pulsed, again harder. The predator roared, lunged, and at the last instant, it twisted aside, slamming into the nearest guard instead. The crowd gasped. The mistress's smile vanished. Chaos exploded in the plaza. Guards rushed forward, but the predator tore through. Them, breaking spears, sending armored bodies crashing into the crowd. The human grabbed a fallen guard's blade and fought back to back with the beast, their movements in perfect sync. Above, the mistress shouted orders, but the noise drowned her out. Someone in the crowd began chanting the human's name. Others joined, the sound swelling until it became a wave that rolled over the entire square. The predator leaped onto the platform's lower level, scattering the mistress's personal guard. The human followed, his eyes fixed on her. She stepped back, fury twisting her features. "You think you've won?" She hissed. "I'm not here to win," he said. "I'm here to end it." The final moments were fast and brutal. The mistress tried to activate the collar one last time, but the predator lunged, ripping the device from its neck and crushing it in its jaws. Sparks exploded, and the glow vanished from its eyes. The human closed the distance in 2 steps. Didn't strike to kill, he grabbed her by the arm and hauled her to the edge of the platform. The crowd below screamed, unsure whether to cheer or panic. "This city is done watching you rule through fear," he said, and with that, he released her. She fell into the square not dead, but broken in pride and power. Her guards rushed too, her side, but the crowd surged, no longer hers to command. When it was over, the human and the predator stood at the edge of the square, the city's noise a distant hum behind them. The beast nudged his side gently, a gesture that spoke louder than any language. They had survived the last command, and somewhere deep in both their minds, they knew the truth. The bond they had was no longer just about a rescue in the rain. It was a promise forged in blood, defiance, and trust that no collar, no mistress, and no galaxy could ever break.